समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I'm Snehesh Alex Philip. Well, last week, the Defense Acquisition Council, led by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, has given an AON, that is acceptance of necessity, for a very important, I would say, a very key project. And that is the airship-based high-altitude pseudo-satellites, one known as AS-HAPS or just HAPS. Now, what are HAPS? And which are the companies or agencies involved in designing and making these pseudo satellites in India? And to carry forward this discussion, I have with me Venkatakrishnan Lakshmi, who is the Program Director, High Altitude Platforms at NAL. NAL is the National Aerospace Laboratories, which comes under the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. They are developing what would be perhaps India's first indigenous HAPS and one of the rare achievements across the world. Welcome to ThePrint, sir.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, first basic question. What is the difference between AS-HAPS and HAPS?
Okay, so maybe we need to step back a little and say, for the benefit of the viewers, what is a HAPS? Essentially a high altitude platform or high altitude platform station, high altitude pseudo satellite, high altitude platform system, take your pick, is a remarkably persistent aerial vehicle. Now it could be a airship, or that's lighter than air, or a heavier than air aircraft at 20 kilometers in the stratosphere, so as to be above all air corridors, flight corridors, and above the weather, most importantly. So
when you say 20 kilometers in terms of altitude, how much feet is it?
65,000 feet above ground level. So this is pressure altitude also. So anyway, so this the idea is to have a remarkably persistent view of a geographical location. Now, these can be used for Earth observation or to make a communications network, or it can be used for ISR or similar purposes. The number of use cases are enormous, from societal to civil to defense and so on. So the idea of putting a vehicle up there in the stratosphere is not new. It's been around ever since the days of airships. So the first question which one gets to mind is, why do you bother with this at all? Don't satellites do the job? And the primary difference is, if you want to be above a geostationary or you want to be above a particular location, be geostationary, that is, you have to be at 36,000 kilometers, like a geostationary satellite. Any lower than that, you are going to windows of operation over a site. Secondly, you need to sometimes repurpose, reposition, or retask an aerial asset. And that is just not possible with the current available satellite technology. You cannot go up there, snatch a satellite out of the atmosphere, bring it down and repurpose it. So comes along this idea of a high altitude station, either airship or aircraft, which you can bring down at will, position at will. So this is high altitude platform or HAPS. Now, the primary contenders are lighter than air, that is balloons, airships. I wouldn't call it, say they use the word balloon because it's more used for meteorological purpose, and it has an image that it tends to drift where it wants to go. I would rather use the word airship, which is deliberately positioned where some person wants to the aircraft or airship to be positioned. So airships, which are lighter than air, or aircraft, which are heavier than air. The idea is both of these start up from the ground, and the aircraft, like any other aircraft, flies up there, and airship lifts up there by means of buoyancy. So the big primary difference between them is the payload that they can carry. Now, balloons can carry very heavy payloads, airships can carry very heavy payloads. Right from the time of the Hindenburg, we know that airships can do enormously well, and with helium-based airships, they're pretty safe too. So they can carry enormous payloads. Aircraft, on the other hand, especially if you want them to be persistent up there, have to have phenomenal endurance. Means the fuel has to be on board. So if the fuel has to be on board, the only fuel you can get up there is solar power.
Yeah.
So essentially, the solar power has to be enough to generate the propulsive force, meaning generate lift, as well as service the payload. Now, the only energy that you can generate on such an aircraft is equal to the wing area. So essentially, you are limited by the wing area of the aircraft. So a high altitude aircraft typically carry smaller payloads. Now, but having said, there are pros and cons of each. While airships carry much higher payload, they move from a station keeping to a station seeking role, like I always like to point out, because of their enormous volume, they get pushed around by the winds. It's very difficult to keep them where you want to be. Then solar heating tends to make them go up or down. And again, they're not at the altitude where you wish to be. The propulsive efficiency is also small because such a big body, you need to move it through the air. And the propulsive force required is significant.
Similarly, what happened to the Chinese balloon?
Yes, there it was not an airship, it was a balloon. Yes, and it drifted wherever it wanted to. So the wind took it. So this is not the intent of the person sending up the aerial asset, because you want it to be where you want it to be rather than where the wind wants it to. So and there are secondary problems to leakage from the membranes. How do you handle the helium problem when or buoyancy problem when you bring it down? You cannot keep throwing out all the extra buoyancy each time. So airships have been tried over the years for almost 2 decades now. There have been no less than a dozen different airship efforts worldwide, starting and the most spectacular of these were the Thales, Elena, Stratobus, and the Google Loon. All of them have been stopped, so to speak, because of many of these problems and the lack of easy solution for them. Aircraft, on the other hand, are picking up interest worldwide, especially enabled by the miniaturization of these payloads. Today, it is possible to have an EOIR camera with that's an electro-optic camera within a few kgs of weight, and these aircraft can easily carry those up to the stratosphere. And this enables us to use these aircraft for pretty much any kind of sensing application, whether it's this or whether you want to do glacier mapping or dropping even weather zones through a hurricane. You can do all of those now through the aircraft. So they have a lesser payload, but they are much more versatile than airships. So that is kind of the long and short of the AS-HAPS versus aircraft HAPS.
versus aircraft HAPS. Thank you so much, sir, for this explanation. Just wanted to find out. So, in India, you have the DRDO, which is making one of the DRDO labs, which is making the airship
Yes.
HAPS. And then for the HAPS, we have View, that is the NAL, and then private, defense startup, set up by, former Air Force officer Samir Joshi's firm. They are also doing HAPS. So why did NAL decide to do HAPS, and how did this journey really start? Because NAL anyways comes under the, CSIR and not under the defense per se. So how did this pseudo satellite thing come about?
Okay, so essentially, this was initiated by discussions at the top level of CSIR, and it was felt that there is two benefits to this. If you look at these kind of aircraft worldwide, there are a number of, I should point out that there are almost 5 or 6 such programs currently running. The lead is the Zephyr, formerly of Kinetic UK, now bought by Airbus, which runs it as Alto, a private, a subsidiary of Airbus. There's also Phaser 35 run by Prismatic of UK. There is the HAP Alpha, which DLR Germany is as yet trying to get on its first flight. There is Kia from New Zealand who have done subscale flights. There is, of course, Sunglider from AeroVironment, the famous Helios people who have been around since very long in the US. There's the Swift engineering in the US. And then there is UAVOS, formerly of Switzerland, who have the APUS Duo, APUS Neo. So for all of these, everyone points out that this is a challenge in extreme engineering, in aerodynamics, in structures, in flight mechanics. So like I said, this kind of aircraft now, this is a typical, this is like a cartoon model of HAPS. So very high wingspan for large endurance, exceedingly light. For example, the NAL HAP has a wingspan of 30 meters tip to tip and a total takeoff weight of only 150 kg.
Oh,
Currently,
wow.
we have a subscale, which is 12 meters wing to tip, tip to tip, and a takeoff weight of only 21 kgs. So you can see that makes this aircraft extremely fragile, of course, but it also extremely flexible. It is, a challenge for aerodynamics, for structures, for the flight mechanics to operate it, properly. So not only does this yield a product which the world over companies and governments are trying to develop, it also pushes the boundaries of aerospace science. So for CSIR and NAL being the only aerospace lab in the civilian sector, this was a exceedingly good use case for pushing our capabilities, testing how much we know in all these areas, from materials to structures to aerodynamics, propulsive efforts on the propellers, flight mechanics, and such. So DRDO, as represented by ADRDE Agra, is making an airship version of the HAPS. And I believe the Air Force is interested in both versions, probably for different use cases. As far as NAL is concerned, we are more driven by the new research that we are producing in this, and as output and as an outcome, we would hopefully be able to fly a prototype of this HAP in the stratosphere soon.
In the stratosphere. So you started the project in 2023, if I'm not mistaken.
Correction. We started in 2021,
Okay.
during the height of the second wave of COVID. So
Yeah.
We really couldn't get much off the ground till late 2021 because of so many restrictions due to the nature of the outbreak. And so pretty much from 2022 onwards, we have been on the job, and the subscale, like I said, a 12-meter, 20 odd kg aircraft has now done more than 100 flights and more than 130 or 140 hours in the air. We have gone up to 25,000 feet, which is like 7.5 kilometers above sea level. Eventually the idea behind the subscale flights has been to make an aerodynamic equivalent of the full-scale aircraft, learn how to operate it, because these aircraft operate autonomously. Obviously, you will understand when I keep saying the word persistent, I neglected to mention the duration. The goal is to have them in the air for 90 days non-stop. So obviously, you cannot have operator fatigue jeopardizing the goal of the mission. So you have to have them completely autonomous, which can handle anything that the environment may throw at them, including gusts or any other weather problems. Yes.
So you've said that this they have undergone about 100 trials of flight trials have taken place so far, but this is of the subscale ones. So why, earlier you mentioned that HAPS need to go at a height of about 60,000 feet. Why are all tests being limited only to 25,000 feet? Because the NRT, that is a new space research of Samir Joshi, has also done around the similar feat. So why only at 25,000 feet have you stopped?
Okay, so essentially, when we fly such aircraft, we have to fly them in designated zones, so to speak. We are based in Bangalore. I cannot very well take this aircraft and lift off from HAL Airport or Jakkur Airport, let alone Bangalore International Airport, simply because, like I said, these aircraft being very long endurance are exceedingly slow. I love to say that it's like a tricycle on a highway. The subscale typically moves at a speed of 30 kph. The full scale at altitude will move at like 100 kph. So you cannot obviously fly it in an air zone where there are other aircraft. So you have to go to an aeronautical test range. We have one such in Norco, which is a exceedingly good facility.
Which is in Chitralunga.
When we go, that's correct. That's correct. So we can get for these kind of vehicles, since we need to look at how high they go, they typically go around in circles to spiral up to, so to speak, to the required altitude. So now to go to a certain altitude, say any altitude beyond say 150 meters, you require a NOTAM, Notice to Airmen, issued by the Airspace Management, essentially, which comes under AAI. So these NOTAMs are fairly, procedure driven, and they are given for a certain day and time slots. Now, ideally, so we would like to go as high as possible, just to test out the limits of the subscale, get more and more experience. And one thing which one should keep in mind, as you go up, the air becomes thinner. The air is only 7% the density of sea level at 20 kilometers. Temperatures can go as low as -90 in the middle of the night at northern latitudes, and -80 elsewhere. So even learning to handle the systems, their survivability, and what do you do when kind of scenarios is very, very important, in addition to testing the aircraft itself. So we would always love to fly higher. But what happens is, even the aeronautical test range, though isolated geographically, as you go up in the cylinder, we find that while we can get up to 25,000 feet clearance by essentially, giving a NOTAM and moving other domestic flights out, from 30,000 feet onwards are the flights which are longer distance. So this kind of lies in the middle of the corridor from the Middle East to the Far East. So if we need to go any higher, you need to say shoo to all those aircraft. So that is not something which can be done lightly. That is not something which can be done easily. I'm not sure of the exact number, but I think international airlines require something like a little more than 2 months advance notice to tell them to take a new route if they have to essentially, part around that cylinder in the air. So far, we've been knocking at a lot of doors. In fact, CSIR has been approaching, right from the Minister of Civil Aviation. We have been doing the rounds because they are, of course, naturally concerned that when we go up there, suppose our aircraft is an unmanned aircraft, after all, an autonomous aircraft too. Suppose it goes out of control. So, or suppose it drifts due to sudden, unexpected winds. Then how are we guaranteeing the safety of other aircraft, which may be somewhere in the vicinity, who have essentially gone around the cylinder? So what really would therefore be great is if we could have a virtual cylinder all the way up to the stratosphere. Beyond 45,000 feet, there are no commercial operations anyway. I mean, there might be some military operations up to 50,000 feet, but essentially, once you go beyond 45, the sky is yours, so to speak. So, but what would be nice is to have this cylinder of, say, 25 nautical miles or so in diameter from the ATR, from the ground up, all the way up to the stratosphere. So these are kind of no-fly zones, essentially, so to speak. If India could create one such about this, I know we have no-fly zones over, say, parts of Rajasthan, but
and several other places.
Several other places. But you have to look at the weather conditions out there. If you go to the northern part of India, from 22 north onwards starts the subtropical, jet stream. So this essentially go from the west to the east, and they're prevalent most of the year. The speeds are exceedingly high, upwards of even 250 kilometers per hour. So it's exceedingly difficult to fly such a slow aircraft. It's like trying to swim in a raging current. And you would not want to end up over Sea of Japan to go collect the pieces anyway. So so essentially you have to stay south of 22 north, get up over the jet stream, and then proceed to wherever you want. And this is something others have also recognized. The Zephyr tested its initial flights for almost 8-9 years in Western Australia, then in the Yuma Proving Grounds in Arizona, and now they fly from Alto Spaceport in Kenya. There are others who have flown from Rwanda. The Koreans with their EAV-4 are looking for any country along the equator which will lend them space for a HAPS port, so to speak. So this is a problem area. I think we are well served by the Chitradurga ATR, provided we could go higher in a larger cylinder, and this requires a window which is significant. It's not like I am in a fighter aircraft, I can zoom up to 55,000 feet in like less than an hour and or so, or I'm a spacecraft. Space launches happen all the time. It's over, it's gone and done within minutes. So we typically, our climb rate is so slow, climbing to 20 kilometers would take roughly anywhere from, depending on weather conditions, from 13 to 18 hours. So
13 to 18 hours, okay.
Yes. and you always have to keep a possibility that you may be forced down again.
Exactly.
So you cannot then say, oops, I'm coming down, please move the aircraft out of the way now. And because like I said, it may be a very light bird, but it is still a bird with a huge wingspan. So you
Absolutely.
cannot have it flying, creeping along rather, when other aircraft are flying nearby. So I would say the need of the hour for these kind of programs is creation of a no-fly zone over a suitable test area. The ATR is a very fine test area, and all the way up to the stratosphere, wherein if at all such a no-fly were possible, we permanently ask the flight paths to be deviated around that cylinder. That would really help test all such male and hail aircraft.
So correct me if I'm wrong. For example, in Rajasthan, over the test ranges, it's a no-fly zone, right?
Yes.
There it can go up. Then you, of course, have Andamans is also the no-fly zone. There are no aircraft, even international aircraft, at whatever height that they are there. So why can't it be flown there? Why only at your test range?
Okay, like I said, Rajasthan, the problem is the subtropical
Oh, right.
jet stream.
The one that you mentioned. Okay.
Yes, and it's a band which starts as early as 12 or 13 kilometers and goes all the way up to 17 kilometers. Anything above 10 kilometers, you are in trouble. Just to give you a number, the wind at 40,000 feet, which is like 12, 13 kilometers. So the wind at 40,000 feet in Rajasthan is around 210 kph. You can look it up in Wind to Sky or any such free resources. The wind above Chellakere at 40,000 feet is like anywhere from 5 to 10 kph. Now,
that's
that's the kind of difference I'm talking about. So if you are flying a developmental aircraft for which you always have to have the possibility of there being an exigency and you need to bring it down quickly, where would you rather fly? Rajasthan or Chitradurga? Now the other one, Andaman, the issue essentially is one of location. Now, developmental programs need a lot of the surround, managing that on a long range till the program matures to a level where we can say, okay, I'm only going to fly this from there. Then, yes, ANC is possible. But prior to that, it is kind of a dicey situation wherein something fails and you're down for weeks till you can come back and get the appropriate part or such. So that's where we are. That's the reason why other programs too have chosen wide, flat deserts with very kind of good weather conditions to try out their aircraft.
So, sir, you mentioned that the over 100 test trials have happened. Now you've been knocking at the doors of the Civil Aviation Ministry for clearance, for basically getting the NOTAM issued. How long has been this process? How long have you been trying?
Okay, so when we
you want a permanent one, or are you looking for only for a specific days? What is it that you're seeking from the Civil Aviation Ministry?
Okay, so there's two parts to it. The usual NOTAMs, which we get to 25,000 feet, are now pretty much, they have figured out that we know how to control our aircraft in the 5 or 10 nautical mile cylinder, which typically we take as for 10 nautical miles. But so far, we have managed to hold our spirals well within 1 nautical mile. So basically, it's a fact that the aircraft is very controllable. Now, for the higher level clearance, we have been trying for almost a year now.
What?
1 year. And the problem is, while in principle the ministry is okay with it, the problem is they have to at certain point take a conscious decision that this, yes, it is a development program. So if you ask me will this aircraft stray, if I'm putting my scientist hat on, I will say there is always a possibility of it.
Of course, it can stray.
Stray, because it's still a development aircraft.
Exactly.
There are no guarantees, right? So I think what happens is it has to be more of a policy decision, and maybe it is good to have a no-fly zone. Eventually, you would know there are several other programs in the country for developing UAVs, both male and hail, which all will require such a test space. It's not a one-off program that there's so many openly announced programs, and we are on track to do well in most of these. So we need a dedicated facility which can allow seamless testing in a restricted airspace, which is a no-fly zone for everyone else, and where we can go up to whatever is the altitude you can go up to. For this, it may be 65,000. For something else, it may be 50,000. So we need that. So I think the only solution is to have a long-term solution, which should be to establish a no-fly zone over this already established test space in Chalakere, Chitradurga, because the government of India has spent enormous amount of money in creating such wonderful facilities. Replicating those elsewhere is, I would think, a waste of public money, rather than clearing this little cylinder of, say, 25 or 30 nautical mile diameter for long distance aircraft. That's a deviation of less than a degree for them to swerve around that region. And we can, if it's our airspace, it's a national sovereign airspace, we can demand it of them.
Director, I must admit, I'm quite shocked by knowing the fact that you've been trying this for over a year. Now, HAPS is supposed to be the future technology that is going to bring in huge strategic significance to our country. And here we have a system which is difficult to move, and that just speaks volumes of why our projects get delayed. Some projects get delayed because of the way that the system is. So for basic question for the viewer, now you have the test range there. Are there more test ranges across the country, or is this the only one?
For do you mean for this purpose or for other purposes?
No, for this purpose.
For aircraft testing, there are other purposes, and in principle, the airspace above any Air Force base is restricted.
Yeah.
But they cannot give this to me for like 24 hours. They can give it to me, a clearance for like few hours. So there are test spaces there. But for this kind of purpose, where you want long endurance, high altitude flights, so any MAIL or HAIL program, this is the ideal, and I would say currently the only space where you can really test this.
Wow. Okay. And when was this test range set up, sir? Because when the test range was set up, didn't they take into account that in future this might be a problem, because this falls into the in the area of, as you said, the Middle East flights?
Yeah, I cannot recall off the top of my head when it was, but it must have been like nearly 20 years ago.
Okay.
Mind you, it works excellently well for pretty much all, low altitude. When I say low, I'm speaking with respect to
25,000 feet.
So it works up to 25,000 feet. It's a breeze. We have never had problems with that. The procedures and the ATC coordination work really well. We have never had any kind of near misses or any thing to cause for concern. So there is something to be said for the process. probably at that time it was not envisaged that India
Yeah,
would
I
so
get it.
quickly need to develop not just the HAP, but also the other aircraft which are more, I would say, strategic in nature and which are being developed. So, which are some of them are partly ready, some of them may take a little longer. Maybe it was not envisaged that so quickly we would need that. But I think now it is on us, and the government has, in principle, looking at those programs. I think this is the ideal time to declare such an area no-fly zone and leverage what we already have built out there rather than going elsewhere, dealing with, I'm sure even for much heavier aircraft than this, doing developmental flights in a jet stream area is less of a good choice than doing it somewhere like where we are now at ATR.
Okay, I get your point. So as far as this your HAPS is concerned, so it has gone up to 25,000 feet. And how many hours of endurance? If I'm not mistaken, I'd done a story on this when the plus subsequently it's about 24 hours or something, 26 hours.
It's in principle we 4 hours. In fact, we have tried to see what can you squeeze out of the aircraft. So we have taken, so essentially in these kind of apps, it is like during the day you run with solar power, during the night you run with batteries.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, what's the kind of solar PV you use on that? You can use either your garden variety, which is what we have put on the subscale app for now, or you can use really high-end triple junction gallium arsenide cells, which will give you 30%, nearly double what we are getting now efficiencies, and be as thin as 40 microns. Typical are like 200 microns. So
Wow.
obviously you get a lighter, much more efficient energy conversion, power generation device. Second, the storage, that's the batteries. Now you can have either run-of-the-mill batteries, which is what we are currently using now, which are just like around 200 watt hour per kg at the pack level, or you can have the really high bleeding edge, which go 450 and even 500 is going to be available next year. So with these run-of-the-mill stuff, we have been able to easily do like 12 hours, and we could easily stretch it a few more hours. The moment I pull out these packs and put those in, I can do 24 hours. And in this, we have even done autonomous landings, night landings, the lot. So we know for sure that the system works. So I could always rip off these solar panels on this, put the fancier ones, and I have a 24-hour vehicle out there.
So correct me again, as far as these solar panels are concerned and other materials that are used, are these materials manufactured in India, procured in India, or are these imported?
Okay, so if you look at the HAPS, there's several parts. One is, of course, the design, whether aerodynamic or structural design or the control law design. All of these are totally done in-house in NAL. And that is actually, in a sense, where the IP is, which is why you never see any significant papers on these kind of areas from any of the other players worldwide. Also, now the solar panel itself, we import from the US because these are very highly specialized panels, and these are not under any form of restrictions, because these are, I mean, you could in principle put them over your jacket and have a way to charge your cell phone. So it's not that it is a ITAR restricted material. So while in the long run, it is good to indigenize this, it should be seen whether it makes a compelling case from the economics of it and whether you want to do that, whether there are other use cases for that solar panel other than this. Because you would never use this kind of solar panel, say, out in a solar farm, because you don't require this kind of solar panel. Anyway, weight does not matter, their thickness does not matter. Now, the batteries themselves, the battery, there's a lot of battery research going on in India currently, spurred on by a various number of applications. So the pouches which we intend to use on the full scale will be around 400 or so watt hour per kg. And these pouches are cells. They are built into a battery system along with its pressure binding, its temperature, thermal management, that is, and its health management systems to give the optimal battery management system. That's all done by us. So the pouches themselves, there are a number of chemistries you can pick and choose. So we pick a certain chemistry. So these pouches, there are certain entities in India which are already working on this. They're not at the 400 watt hour per kg level at the moment, but I think there in that we will get there eventually. Now on the other things, we make a design and make our own propellers. We make the airframe ourselves. So there may be always the odd servo or the other which you want to procure, that simply because it is already certified, and you'd be aware certification is a very, very big challenge and important part of any aircraft. So for those, so we will get there eventually. The goal here in this program of CSIR is to demonstrate that it is possible to have a technology of a stratospheric solar powered persistent high altitude platform. And that's the mission. Once you get there, then one would tick off all the check boxes, so to speak, on indigenization of the various components.
So the miniature HAPS is done. It is now waiting for high altitude flight for over the last 1 year. And once that is done is when you will go for the full version of it.
Okay, we are not waiting for higher altitude flights, because we have already flown so often and so much at 25,000 feet, where the air is still, moderate. It's a fairly friendly. Temperatures are like -10, and that's all. So, but we have already commenced work on the full scale, and we envisage that by the end of this calendar year, we will have a full scale HAP ready for the first flight.
Okay.
And again, that too will have to be in a series of
stages
of
altitude stages.
Stages, yes, absolutely. So we will, and when we are close to 25,000 feet, believe me, this time we are going to be knocking harder, because then the whole purpose of a high altitude platform is suspect if you don't go to the high altitudes itself.
Absolutely. And I hope, that people who watch this video, the decision makers are able to understand the significance of having such a corridor. And I hope that decisions, the process is sped up. So you're saying by end of this calendar year, which means that end of 2026. So which means that your first flight happens then, and subsequently to reach 25,000 feet, how many flights or how much time would it take?
See, it essentially flight testing is built on data which you get. For example, in the subscale, we were able to go from the initial takeoff roll to the 25,000 in just about 5 months.
5 months.
So,
oh, wow.
5 months, because again, you should remember that we cannot test during the monsoon.
Okay.
Because the cloud base is fairly low, and there are a lot of turbulent activities inside the monsoon clouds. So you just cannot fly this. This is a vehicle which you don't fly when you want. You fly, you take off when you can and use when you want. So there are certain blackout dates, say June to maybe October in the southern part of India, is essentially a downtime. That's the time we kind of get everything ready for the next flight test. So our best flight testing window starts late October and kind of ends mid-May.
Mid-May. So I would assume that from October end of this year, till
Yes.
May next year, you would be conducting all your flights and reach the 25,000 level. So, but
That's the
and
hope.
so before I let you go, also, NAL is the development agency. It's not the production agency. So have you already identified a production partner? If I'm not mistaken, you're working with a private firm for the cameras to be fitted on board on it, right?
Uh, not the cameras. There is a private firm called Galaxy,
Yeah.
which makes synthetic aperture radar. And
Okay.
they did approach us saying that, look, here is our radar. Can you give us a test flight? Which NL is most happy to do always. And we took it up to like a couple of kilometers, because as of yet, their radar was also in developmental stage. It's not that they already have a system. They are developing it as and when. So they're trying to optimize the power usage and the form factor, so it fits inside that. So we have done that. The other EO payloads are being developed by DRDO for specifically for the HAP program. As to your question of eventual production and of this aircraft, the DAP 2026 allows even agencies like CSIR to develop a system and then select a private partner who will essentially go through with the last stages of the technology readiness ladder, so to speak, to make it robust, and we will jointly certify the system and then hand it over. Now, the DAP 2026 has an explicit provision for this. So once this technology is ready, sufficiently mature, so once we are routinely started doing high altitude flights like we are doing with the subscale at 25K, now we will put out an expression of interest request, and all entities which wish to participate in making such a HAP will, of course, then approach us, and the normal government procedures will apply on selection of the best.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to ThePrint. And I sincerely hope that by October this year, you'll at least get that flying corridor that you so desperately want. And I think it's something that, we as a country should focus on, and also think, how to make the systems more easy to enable our agencies, our entrepreneurs, both in government and in private sector, to really match the demand that comes from the forces. But thank you so much for speaking to ThePrint, and I hope to catch you end of this year when your first flight of the large scale is done.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.